Hey y'all, welcome back to the Roots and Dirt podcast. I was hoping to be outside today, but it is rainy and gross out, but we really need the rain, so I'm not going to complain about that. All my flowers are planted up in their pots for the summer, but my vegetable plants are still in my garage under grow lights. Today we're going to talk about not getting fooled by false summer. I know a lot of times in other places, and it happens here too, right? We talk about false spring. Don't get tricked by false spring. I love false spring because in Minnesota at least, false spring is a nice little reprieve from the dead of winter and gives me a little bit of hope for the warm weather ahead. But false summer can be dangerous to a gardener, at least here in Minnesota. Dangerous in the lightest sense of the word, obviously. Now, I never really plant any of my crops out until the end of May, with the exception of onions and spinach. Onions and spinach, ideally, I would have liked to have had in the ground like mid to late April. But that's just not happening here this year. Our son graduates today, actually. Not today when you're seeing this, but today as I'm recording. And we had his graduation party a couple weeks ago. Thoroughly enjoyed celebrating him and seeing family and friends. He cooked some incredible brisket. We had a great southern cookout, which was amazing. Yes, we're in Minnesota, but I'm, again, like I think you guys know, or I've said before, I'm originally from the South, and so a lot of that runs through my blood. So I still thoroughly enjoy all my Southern cooking. But we had a great time celebrating him, and as I'd mentioned before, I was not growing plant starts out for the general public this year, and so because of that, I have not been concerned with potting up most of my seedlings. And during his graduation time frame, I was focused on prepping all of that stuff, and so I was not potting up the things that needed to go in the ground later. Because of that, that meant that I was just starting to pot on my baby seedlings into their slightly larger pots, starting to expose them to a lot more sun and things like that this week. And that's something that I really need to do for my plants. One, because I want to give a high quality plant to those who are purchasing from me or who I am providing plants for, but also because where I garden, it is full sun all day, every day. From the time the sun comes, not full sun as in like full sun, 6 hours full sun, but full sun in like all day full sun. So because of that, if I don't have my plants very well hardened off, exposed to sun all day as much as possible outside, not just under grow lights, exposed to the wind, I'll lose a lot of seedlings to sun scald and wind damage and things like that. So I really focus on producing a very high quality plant right from the get-go. That meant this last week when we had 90 plus degree days for about 5 days in a row, and everybody was really thrilled. Well, actually, most Minnesotans aren't super thrilled about 90-degree days. I love the 90-degree days. They were absolutely lovely. However, it is hard going from 30s and 40s to 90 in a matter of a few moments. That's a little bit of a shocker to the system. But once you adjust to it, just drink plenty of fluids, lots of electrolytes, you'll be just fine. Because I had not potted up my seedlings yet, when we had those really warm days, the 70s and then the 80s and then the 90s for the past few weeks, I had not really planted anything out. I don't even, unfortunately, have my onions and spinach in the ground, which that one is a little bit annoying, but it's fine. It is what it is this year, and I will just be content with that. They will get in the ground soon. However, because I didn't have my plants ready, I was not tempted to go and throw them in the ground, get them started in the garden, and try to get a nice early start to my season. Had they been ready to go out, I very well might have been tempted to do so. But I will tell you, if you live in our climate, do not be tricked by false summer. It's easy to not be tricked by false spring here because it's the middle of March and you know we're going to get snow and icky stuff still, right? You're going to drop into lots of freezing temperatures. Our last frost date isn't till the middle of May, or like May 10th-ish, Mother's Day. So it's very easy to not be tricked by false spring, but it is hard to not be tricked by false summer. Here, we don't really have a lot of a spring. We often go from quite cold temperatures to summer very quickly. Usually by the beginning of June, we're already in the 80s and 90s here. We go from really cold to very warm very quickly. The problem with that is that if you plant somewhere in the middle of that, somewhere in the middle of it being cold and then it actually being summer, we get like a fake summer where we get these really warm 80 to 90 degree days, and then we have a week like this week, the one that's coming up here, where the nights are dipping into the 30s and 40s and the highs are in the 50s and 60s. That seems great, right? Like it gives you a little bit of a quick reprieve, maybe if you like cold weather. That's not my cup of tea, but it gives you a little reprieve from the warm weather. You can acclimate a little bit more to it before you jump into it full time. Well, your cool weather crops, they don't mind the cold weather, right? But planting them out sooner, planting them out before that first wave of warm weather, when that warm weather hits and then it gets cold again, that can send those baby plants into thinking that it's going into fall and winter, right? And so a lot of your spring crops like broccoli and cabbage and things like that, if you plant them out in the early spring and then we get some warm weather and then we jump back down into cold temperatures, that can cause them to bolt prematurely when the warm weather that is going to stay actually arrives. And so you don't, unless you have a crop that matures fast enough to where you can get that full broccoli harvest, that full cauliflower harvest, whatever it might be, before that second wave of warm weather comes and stays, oftentimes you're not going to get a nice big head of broccoli. You're not going to get a nice big cabbage. You're going to bolt and then you won't have a crop. And I hear that often here, and people don't really know why their crops are not forming or growing to maturity like they should. Well, oftentimes it's because you put them in the ground when it was really nice and cold, like you're always told to do with cold season crops. But then it warms up and then it gets cold again and then it warms up again and it forces them into maturing too fast before they're really ready and before they've actually matured. So what you want to do instead is wait to plant those crops out. You can try all you want to do that, and some years it might work and you may get an early crop, and that's fantastic, right? Like if you have the resources to throw at that, go for it. I wait to plant even my cool season crops like my broccoli and things like that. I wait to plant them until the end of May, like maybe mid-May at the most, but generally I'm planting those the same time I'm planting my warm season crops because I want them to start when it's warm so they're not pushed into that cycle of wanting to mature and bolt and produce seed. So if you plant them when it's already warm, you'll form a really nice head of cabbage. You'll form a really nice head of broccoli. You'll form a really nice cauliflower, and you won't have the issue of them dipping from warm weather to cold weather to warm weather, maybe to cold weather again, and then back to warm weather, where they start bolting. Now, another thing that I often hear is that my peppers never produce as much. Well, peppers are very heavy feeders, so it could simply be that your soil is depleted and you need more nutrients in it, okay? So that could be one thing. I always recommend, if you feel like your garden has been not producing as well over the last while, that you make sure that you amend with some really good, high quality composted manure. That can be almost any manure you want. It could be horse manure, cow manure, sheep manure is great. You could use rabbit manure, whatever you want to use, but put a good dose of that into your garden, preferably in the fall so that it can settle over the winter. But you can certainly do it early spring and then wait a month and a half or so before you plant into it. If it's composted down decently, then you shouldn't really have a problem with it being too hot to plant in. But get that worked into your soil again. And I think you'll find that you have much better harvests overall and much healthier plants, much better ecosystem and soil health. That being said, peppers and tomatoes and all of those crops are also very susceptible. They do not like cold weather. So they really don't want to be outside when it's 50 degrees out regularly and then dipping colder. They would much rather be outside when it's consistently warm. And I don't mean just consistently warm during the day where it's 70, 80 degrees during the day, but it's dipping below 50 at night. I mean, you want your nighttime temperatures to be consistently over 50 degrees. So for us here, usually that's the end of May. You want to put your plants out then. Planting them out before that, I promise you, you do not gain anything. Not in our climate here. Maybe southern Minnesota, but here in like south central Minnesota, and certainly in northern Minnesota, you're not going to want to plant out before that. All your plants are going to do here at that time, unless we have, and we can occasionally every, however many years, you might have an early summer that just starts sooner and stays around, but that is very, very rare that happens. You're going to want to wait until those temperatures warm up. Otherwise, your plants are just going to sit in the ground. They're not going to produce what you want them to produce. And when it's chilly like that, when it's cooler at night, and even now, like our daytime temperatures are going to be, today I think the high is only 47. That's cold. So your plants are just going to sit there in the ground stunted. They're not going to grow much. They might grow a little bit, but I promise you, my plants that I plant the end of May when it's actually warm, things like your eggplants, your tomatoes, your peppers, even potatoes. Potatoes, I know they say put them in on Good Friday. Half the time on Good Friday here in Minnesota, there's still a bunch of snow on the ground and the ground's too frozen to even dig. So that's not really possible here. I don't know where that saying developed, but it definitely wasn't where I live. It definitely developed somewhere else. And then people hear it over time, right? And so then, and if you planted a Good Friday in the South, that might be too late to plant potatoes. I don't really know how that works down there, but my guess is it gets too hot to grow potatoes through the summer. So you probably would need to plant sooner down south. I don't really know for sure. I would love for you to comment down below where you're at and when the actual good time is to plant potatoes. But here, if I plant those crops the end of May, they will be caught up and end up surpassing the crops of those who planted sooner within just a couple weeks, right? And they're much healthier plants because they haven't struggled through all of that junk beforehand, right? They were put into a climate in which they can actually do well right off the bat. It'd be like setting a kid up to thrive, giving them a great home life, giving them great food and nutrients and all of those things, and knowing that you've given that child the best chance, right? You've loved them, you've given them a great home, you've You've provided for them well. You're teaching them the ways of the Lord, blah, 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 right? You've set them up for success. Does that mean that that child's always going to be successful? No, that child can still make its own choices. That child can still crash and burn. However, you've set them up and given them the best chance that you could, right? So the same is true of your baby plants. You could put that plant out and you could still have some that crash and burn and get early disease or just don't produce as well, based on the situations they find themselves in, right? However, they have the best chance if you set them out later. So don't be fooled by the false summer that we're experiencing. Your plants do not want to be outside right now for the next week when it's 47 degrees during the day or even 50 some degrees during the day and then 30s and 40s at night, or even 60s during the day and 30s and 40s at night. They really don't want to experience that. They will do much, much better if you wait to plant them. Especially right now, we have rain falling, which we've desperately needed. However, that rain is cold. And I went out yesterday to pull some weeds and check on my garlic that's growing, which, by the way, is growing very poorly because due to a number of different things, I did not get it covered last fall. And we had almost no snow this year. And we had a decently normal winter temp-wise. And so a lot of my garlic, I think I just lost in the freeze thawing portions of winter in the fall spring, right? They're not planted very deep. So if it gets warm and then they try to get going and then it gets cold again, they can rot in the ground and sometimes birds eat them. I've seen that. Other things dig them up. So at any rate, I went out to go weed my garlic crop that is sort of there and full of weeds because it's not covered with a straw mulch right now. And pulling those weeds out, the stuff that was attached to them still was quite chilly. So had I planted things in the ground, they would have been very unhappy with me right now. And even bean seeds and things like that, like they're not going to germinate in soil that is cold, right? Cold and wet's just going to rot your seed. You would much prefer to plant them when it's warmer, and then that seed can actually germinate and get going. So knowing when to plant, gardening teaches you a lot. Gardening teaches you a lot of patience. Besides parenting, I'm not sure if I know, and maybe marriage, gardening, and parenting teach you equal amounts of patience. Maybe parenting and marriage a little bit more, right? But gardening forces you to be patient. You can plant things early, you can jump the gun, but oftentimes you pay the price for that. Sometimes it works out in your favor and that's great, but I personally don't have enough resources and don't want to waste my money and my time by planting out a lot of things that could have just waited a little bit longer and would have really thrived. So just keep that in mind when you're planning your spaces. Ask around to some really seasoned gardeners and find out when they're planting their things, and don't just ask one person. Maybe ask a good handful of people. Reach out to your local garden clubs. You could plant sooner and put like row covers and things like that over them and try to give them some extra warmth that way so that they're not getting as cold at night. That's a good option. I don't want to do all of the extra work if I don't need to do all of the extra work, right? And as a home gardener and a home preserver, someone whose aim and goal is to feed our family, I would much rather focus on the things that could go in early, things like spinach and onions, tending to my garlic, radish maybe, things like that. Things that will do fine in the cool weather, maybe some lettuce varieties that are more cold hardy. Things like that. I would much rather put my time and energy into planting more of that. Peas would do great. They can do cold weather, and not plant out the things that are going to struggle and barely hang on, or it's going to stunt their growth and reduce their harvest later. I would much rather plant something that is going to be a success. So I hope that you didn't get tricked by fake summer here, and that you've held off, and enough of our chats have helped you remember to be patient. I know it's hard. I almost got tricked this year too. The extended forecast actually looked pretty decent for a little while, where I thought, oh, maybe it is actually going to be one of those years where it sticks around. But sure enough, it's not. It's cold again today, and we're experiencing some beautiful rain, and not having to be focused on planting has given me time to celebrate our son and really help him work through all of those last little bits of things to prepare him for this coming school year at college. And those things are important too, right? And if you're focused too much on doing things like getting everything in the garden as soon as it's instantly warm out, you miss out on other stuff too. Just remember to use your time and your resources in a way that is wise. I don't like to waste the resources that God's given me. I would much rather use wisdom in my plantings. And just the longer you garden, the longer you plant, the easier it is to kind of feel out the weather. And that comes with time, and you'll get better as you go, and you'll realize, oh, this isn't happening yet, and so maybe I should wait. The leaves on our trees just finally are fully emerged. We even have some trees that don't have leaves fully on them yet, that are just still like halfway through the bud stage. So that's another thing to think of, is that the trees are still waking up. And if the trees are still waking up, then it's probably not time for you to put plants in the ground, at least not the warm weather plants. So I hope wherever you are that you're enjoying your gardening season, that you've been able to prepare your spaces, and if you're somewhere warmer, that you're already enjoying some of the fruits of your labor. Thanks for joining me on another episode of the Roots and Dirt podcast. I have realized that if I'm going to continue to produce content through the summer and the growing season, that I am going to have to do so in a different manner, because potting up plants this year and things like that, this is the time of year that gets a little bit crazy, and there isn't really time to record in the studio space with all the microphones and equipment. So you're probably gonna find me outside a bit more, or we'll find each other outside a little bit more over the summer here. Maybe content will look a little bit different, but we'll still try to be as educational and encouraging and uplifting as we can. Thanks for joining me on another episode of the Roots and Dirt podcast.